Hello, everybody. Welcome to another week of Deep Cuts. Today's episode I'm particularly excited about because we have a OG guest, as I would say. We have a guest from the original Deep Cuts when I was doing this on Instagram Live in the middle of the pandemic, and we get to bring him back. So, for those of you who don't know, the guest today is Michael Herklots, Ferio Tego. So I'm very excited to have him on today, and let's bring up our guest, Mr. Herklots. How are you?
OG.
OG. You were one
Nice.
of the people I remember. I remember during the pandemic sitting around just like everybody else, going like, "What are we going to do now?" And just being like, "What in the world's going on?" And what am I going to do now? And I remember you were probably in a similar position where had all this travel planned and all these little things going on, and all of a sudden, all of that was just non-existent, and you were one of
Crazy.
the first people to kind of embrace technology and digital stuff. And I remember watching lots of your Instagram lives. So I tell people you were one of the inspirations behind Deep Cuts because I was watching you and I was like, wow, I was like, he's like showing all of us media people out because you were doing these great interviews. You had like very engaging guests and questions, and I was just like, I have to figure this stuff out. I mean, I was
I'm
speaking.
impressed, man. I mean, you've stuck it out and it's gotten better and better. I think I did 14, something like that, 14 back to back. And then I was like, you media people can have it. I'm out.
But since then I've seen you host and with the Great Smoke, like doing interviews and stuff like that. So I was like, you have a whole new career that kind of like opened up because of the people seeing you be able to host and talk to people. So I
Yeah,
thought that
man.
was fun.
If Ferio Tego doesn't work out, I'll be an auctioneer and a TV host.
Oh yeah, I forget about your great auctioneer talent that people get to see every year on display at Pro Cigar. I know Ben was asking, he's like, did Michael do his Pro Cigar bit? And everybody's like, yep. I was like,
It was
of
great.
course.
And let me tell you, I mean, what a year. You know, we went into Pro Cigar having missed last year, and you know, the one of the things that have gotten hit the hardest through the pandemic is obviously charities and philanthropy, where there just hasn't been the opportunity to support. And that's those are my opening remarks when we started the auction. Like, look, we missed a year, the charities missed a year, but the need did not miss a year. The need has been there throughout all of this, if not more so. And so everyone is going to leave this auction broke. And I'll tell you what, man, we raised $340,000. It was unreal.
And that's like always. I know a lot of people watching this probably haven't experienced Pro Cigar, but it's definitely like the highlight. Like you have all these great events going on, and you get to do all the tours, but the gala night is like especially this so important, especially because you just all the money that's raised and the benefit that it has for people in the Dominican Republic who are making these cigars. It's just, I think it's part of the festival that maybe doesn't get enough attention because everybody's always wrapped up in the cigars
I
and
agree with that. And it's not to take away from what the festival is. The
right,
festival really is about learning about premium cigars, learning about tobacco, spending time with manufacturers, spending time with one another. But just that one night is about something a little bit different. It's doing all of that and being able to help people. And I mean, if you think about how much money is raised via this, how many lives are made better because of this, and the generosity of people in our industry, whether they're consumers or retailers and manufacturers, the generosity is really overwhelming in the premium cigar world. I feel super blessed to be a part of it. I also feel blessed to be able to extract all that money out of them from the auction stand.
I always say that what people don't get or see in the tobacco industry is that charitable side. And there's so many companies within the industry that are doing good that for whatever reason, they don't get that media attention for that part. Like I said, it's not just about the cigars, it's about giving back. And so
Yeah.
that part of Pro Cigar, like I said, is a really important part that hopefully more people will get to know and get to see firsthand. but I saw that you were super busy that weekend because I was following along on Instagram, and I saw that you were there, and then you were jumping on a plane and going to Florida to do that, and you were in your Hawaiian shirt, which I was like, wow, it's like it's fun to see you like outside of a suit because we're so used to all these years. I think the chapter, the Nat Sherman chapter of your life was all about the suits, and now you seem a lot more relaxed and like really kind of in your element.
Well, I tried walking around my house in a suit, and my kids were finally like, "Daddy, what are you doing? You have nowhere to go. You have nothing to do. Just stop pretending. All right, just stop it." So, but I still love getting decked out and putting a suit on. When I go to the city, I get dressed. Obviously, when I do events and stuff, I get dressed. But otherwise, it's cash. Although I can tell you, the likelihood of seeing me in a Hawaiian shirt again is probably very small, man. Very small.
it
But I
was
did save it. I did save it just
it
in
was
case.
it was one of those things. Like maybe if they ever have like a cigar industry Smithsonian, you, I think you need to contribute that to.
It's gonna go like in one of those Hard Rock Cafe frames.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Funny.
Well, I wanted to have you back on because I was looking at my phone. I think must have been last month when I was like, who can I invite on as guest? And I was like, Michael Herklots, because you were on, like I said, the original version of this when we were
It was
on
probably
Instagram.
this time, right? Was it March?
It was April 2nd. I looked at it this afternoon, but you were on like one of the first people on, and we
2020.
yes, 2020. So a lot has happened since 2020. You were with a completely different company, has a whole bunch of other things going on. And so I was like, this is a great time for a follow up because there's just so much going on with Ferio Tego. And I want people to know more about Ferio Tego and about where you are right now in your career and life, because I'm, like I said, so much changed since last time we spoke. So,
Like literally everything has changed since the last
right,
time we spoke.
right. So I guess I don't want to go too far back because for people who are watching this, if you go onto the Deep Cuts website and the YouTube, there is the original Michael Herklots interview where we talked about the past and all this other stuff, and there's articles on it. So all that is kind of like documented, well documented, I think.
Yeah.
So we don't need to backtrack too much. But going back to how this all began, like the whole Ferio Tego process, at what point did you think maybe I want to start my own brand?
Well, I've always dreamed of having my own brand. Um, I just never thought I would be able to pull it off, to be honest with you. Um, I've always, as was recognized a couple of years ago, I've always had what I would consider to be an entrepreneurial spirit.
Mm-hmm.
As a musician, I would hustle and get my own gigs and start my own band and do all that kind of stuff. But largely from a professional standpoint, I've always worked for other people, and I've been very fortunate to be able to work with other people and grow my career. And so some of that entrepreneurialism, particularly the risk-taking part of entrepreneurialism, I think wore off a bit and was replaced with a bit of comfort, having a job I could lean on and I could depend on. But there was always a dream of being more to the business, to the industry than just an employee. And so when once we finally made the decision that Nat Sherman was going to close, that we couldn't sell it, I really just thought very hard about what my options were in the industry, out of the industry, with other companies. And, I feel super, super lucky. I spent a tremendous amount of time talking with friends and colleagues from other companies, owners, high-level executives, all big companies, small companies, just picking their brain, like what did they think would be the right fit or the next move, and almost everyone said the same thing, which was, look, we would love to have you in our organization, but this is the time for you to do your own thing. I mean, everybody said it. And that was kind of hard to ignore. So my original plan was to do Ferio Tego. I had owned the brand for many, many years just to protect it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, I would just do a small startup and start the brand, do it very simply, work with the casadas and start. But as time went on through the closing process of Nat Sherman, it became clear that that's the thinking of Altria had changed a bit from not being willing to sell the brands to at least being interested in considering what a brand acquisition would look like. And once it was clear that they would potentially consider selling the brands, then that really that lit a fire that is kind of difficult to explain, because the way that the deal was contemplated first was to sell the company, which obviously I had no ability to purchase a company.
Right.
And in fact, I was charged with selling the company. And so it would be a conflict for me to also try and buy it. So it was just way too difficult and way too big. And so that was that. But then the thought of the brands continuing, that felt like my work was being put up for sale without me. And that really got me kind of fired up. And so I confirmed that, in fact, they were considering the sale of the brands, and then expressed interest, and then immediately got together with now my business partner, Brendan, who was the former CFO of Nat Sherman, and said, hey, we might have a real opportunity here. I don't know what you were thinking about doing after this, but what do you think about this plan? And he was like, absolutely, let's at least try. And we put together a letter of intent and we sent it to the big top of Altria, and they said, if you're serious, then let's really work together and see if we can pull this off. And so we got them an offer in 7 days. And the way they explained it was, we weren't the biggest, we weren't the highest offer, we weren't the lowest offer, but we were definitely the right offer. And they really loved the work that we did. They loved the category. It just wasn't core to them long term. And it was a resounding yes. And then we got to work forming the company and doing the deal and the transaction. And that was just at the end of 2020. So we didn't announce it until 2021. And then Brendan and I just got to work re-engaging with the factories, letting them know the good news, like, don't throw anything out. Let's pick this up in January. But the good news is, we're gonna hold on to the brands, and we're gonna bring them back, and we're gonna make them better than ever. So far, so good.
Now you talked about that initial, I don't want to say fear, but that feeling that when you were with Nat Sherman, like, it was comfortable because you didn't have to worry about all the stuff that a individual entrepreneur who owns their own business has to worry about. And I think a lot of people, including myself at different points in my career, have felt like that, where you're just like, I would love to be out on my own, but then I have to worry about this, and this. And, there's a certain comfort level of just having somebody else worry about that for you.
Well, I'll tell you, there's in all likelihood, there's just no way this would have happened without Brendan. I mean,
Right.
his skill set is everything that mine is not. I know cigars, I know tobacco. There's obviously plenty more to learn. That's a never ending journey, but all the front of house work I've always done in all my roles, I feel like I continue to get better, and I continue to try and learn. But the idea that I would have to try and learn from scratch accounting and compliance and all that administrative back office stuff, which I've had the good fortune of having when you work for other companies, to have to learn that was really quite paralyzing. And so to have Brendan as my partner in this business, it was just perfect. Everything he's good at, I have absolutely no experience in. I'm learning a little as we go, but it was as much a lock for him as this side was for me.
And I think all the books that I've read about business have always said that's what you have to do, is you have to kind of recognize what areas you're not competent or very good at, and find somebody who is very good at those parts, and then that's how a good business and good leadership team is all formed. So it sounds like
Yeah.
that's what you realize early on, rather than trying to say I'm just going to do all these things myself, which I know some entrepreneurs try, and it usually doesn't end well.
Well, and then you have to figure out how to get to market,
Mm-hmm.
which again, that was another huge hurdle, and we looked at a million options. But we were again once again super fortunate to align with Davidoff USA. I'd worked for them for 10 years prior to Nat Sherman, and then with Nat Sherman worked with them because they manufacture our host blend in Honduras. So really a 20-year relationship with Davidoff, and just through regular dialogue about bringing the brands back, they asked how we were going to market. And when we walked them through some of our initial ideas and concepts, they said, well, let's think differently and work together and see if there's an opportunity for Davidoff USA to distribute it, which, is ridiculous. I mean, what an incredible opportunity. And it worked out. It worked out great. And once again, they talk about, filling in the blanks. So here are Brendan and I, now we've got a company and we've got this suite of products that's not a startup portfolio by any means. It's a very mature portfolio of products. How do you stand that up as a startup? And then you find, a group with similar mindset, like passion, mutual respect and admiration, and all the skill sets that we don't have and the talent we don't have. And once again, perfect. Away we go and we're in market. But it's not without, let me tell you, there's a tremendous amount of humble pie to eat when you are starting all over from scratch, trying to grow a business. And, going back to what I said earlier, the conversations I had with folks, I mean, from as diverse a group as, I'll give you three: Matt Booth, Pete Johnson, Carlito Fuente, and Glenn Wolfson from Drew Estate. I mean, and that's just four. But I mean, what a CEO of a major company, Carlito, a godfather of our industry,
Mm-hmm.
Matt and Pete, the kings of boutique. And to have that level of just support and guidance and thinking partners was awesome.
I remember when the news came that Nat Sherman was shutting down and all that stuff, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh!" And then there was all these articles and YouTube videos about what's Michael Herklots going to do next. What was that like? Because that was, I'm sure that was such a weird experience, because you kind of probably knew after speaking to enough people and kind of get speaking with Brendan and figuring out what you were going to do, and then there's all the speculation. It was so strange and amusing to a degree that was the news item. Like, what's Michael Herklots going to do next? And it was like all the speculations. What was that like, watching all that unfold and seeing that the industry wanted to know what, where were you going to land next? Were you going to stay in the industry? Were you going to go out of the industry?
Man, no one has ever asked me that question. So the timing of it, we announced that we were going out of business in July, and we announced Ferio Tego in January, and we didn't complete the Ferio Tego deal until the very end of 2021. So to be honest, when all those first videos started coming out with speculation, I did not have a plan. I mean, I was following along with everyone else saying, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. Maybe I was taking notes on some of them, like, "Oh, I didn't think about that. Let me try that." At the time, I was so focused on just closing the business the right way. I didn't spend a whole lot of time watching that stuff, which is probably good in hindsight.
Yeah.
But what I did feel throughout the whole process was just this incredible sense of support. And, let's face it. I mean, particularly my time at Nat Sherman, and especially the last 3 years at Nat Sherman, that was met with some pretty heavy challenges during the time that Altria owned us. I mean, there was a lot of challenges. We'll leave it at that. And a lot of that ended up becoming personal. I certainly took it personally as a challenge, but I also was attacked personally. And that always felt, and I'd never blamed anybody because obviously people say what they're going to say. But it did give me some sense of pause knowing that this news was going to come out. I assumed it would be met with some of the same haters who would be saying things like, ha, good, ha, whatever. And it wasn't. And instead it was really a resounding, sigh. It was a resounding, gasp of disappointment. I think even the people who didn't like the fact that Nat Sherman was owned by Altria still felt what the loss was going to be in a premium cigar industry without Nat Sherman. And so really, despite the hypotheses of where I was going to go or what I was going to do, what I took away from all of it was not necessarily what the guesses were, but that so many people cared. It was really heartwarming.
What the most interesting thing I think that came out of that time frame was that kind of, again, it kind of amused me because I'm always on social media as part of my job to kind of follow what's going on in the industry. The announcement came out, Nat Sherman's going away. This is going to be our last day, and then you see like this major flood of interest in Nat Sherman cigars all of a sudden. Like, how did that feel? Because I would think that would be a little like, you were like, it's great, but it would be nice if you all were interested like beforehand. Like now,
well, but here's the thing: that flood was not. It was certainly not from the population that didn't like us,
right?
But the flood of interest was really from the people who loved us. And to be honest, as maybe sick as it sounds, there was something really nice about going out the way we did in the time that we did it. I mean, don't forget, there was nothing wrong with the business. There was nothing wrong with the company. There was nothing wrong with our products. It was purely a business decision to exit the category from big tobacco, which I don't blame them for making that decision. But we were able to go out in a time when people needed support. And so retailers all around the country who had sold our products for years were able to buy in at a better price and be able to make a little more margin when they had been closed for 6 weeks, from the pandemic. And same with consumers, that they were able to load up on cigars that they have depended on for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And they got to buy them at a better price and stock up and know that they could look in their humidor and they're still going to have their favorite cigars for what would have been, maybe years to come after we exited. Now, fast forward, now we have the brands and they're back in market. So now I'm telling everyone, all right, enough with the old stuff. Let's move it through, make room for the new. Come on, let's go.
Exactly.
But it was nice to go out the way we did. And it was nice to see the support. And it was nice to see some of that validation that it wasn't the cigars. People loved the cigars and they loved the blends and they didn't know how to live without them. And
Mm-hmm.
so they went crazy looking for them. That's a lot of validation.
Before we kind of close out this part, I just remember reading all the speculations from the different websites and bloggers and stuff about what's Michael Herklots going to do. I think the most interesting one that stood out to me was, they were wondering like maybe Michael Herklots will become the president of the PCA. And I was like, does he want that kind of like pressure, like to go from Altria and all the pressure there to suddenly, that kind of position? I was like, I don't think he would. I don't know. I mean, we speak a lot, but I was like, I don't think that's kind of in his mind frame. Like, I want that much pressure to.
I mean, that was one of the more out of the box um, hypotheses.
Mhm.
I had lots of conversations with the PCA throughout the process. None of them were job interviews. Uh, but again, I mean, for someone to say that though means that they think I could do it, and that's really kind of a special thing.
Well, of course. I mean, you're one of those people in this industry that you named all these people that you went to for advice, but every time I interview somebody, and I go to trade shows and all that kind of stuff, like you're one of the people that they always seek out, and they know what you're about, and that you give them good advice and feedback and all that stuff, and you have for all these years. So I think that people trust you, and I think that for all these different speculations of what you were going to do, it all came down to they saw you in those positions because they would trust that you would bring the same kind of integrity that you brought to Nat Sherman into these different other ventures. And I'm
You
sure
know,
there's a universe out there where you did become the PCA president or all this weird stuff.
for me, what I started in the business in 1999. When you look at the culture at the time and the culture today, premium cigar enthusiasts are premium cigar enthusiasts. But look at what has happened just in technology in those whatever 22, 25 years. Um, it's very easy, I think, to want to move faster. It's very easy to want to get bigger. Uh, in any hobby, there's always this sort of, with the advent of social media, this desire to be the authority, this desire to be an expert, to be an influencer or a celebrity or whatever. Man, I feel so lucky that I started when I did, because when I started, you had to earn a seat at the table. And I've been in now, whatever it is, 22 years. And every day I'm still trying to earn a seat at the table. I still feel like the new guy, even though I've been around as long as I have. And that's because I will always be surrounded by people who know more than I do, that I can learn from. And, I appreciate you saying what you did, because that's validation. Like, I'm still me. I'm still authentic. What you see is what you get. I don't have, maybe I post more pictures in suits on Instagram than I actually wear in real life, but still, I'm a pretty straight shooter, and I'm honest, and my word is my bond, and that's all I've got. And that's how I was at 19 when I started in this business. That's what you get now at 41. It's still the same. And I try and be a good friend to people, and I try and be useful to this industry and give back to the industry when I have the opportunity to. And I think um, that should be all of our goals. If we have the privilege of being able to make a living in this industry, we have to make sure that we pay the industry the respect that it deserves, and make sure that we pave the road for those coming after us to have it a little easier, so that they can contribute something different and I can learn from them too.
Well, definitely. Like I always say, you probably taught me more about how to write an article than than anybody else. Because working on that article, that cover story for that magazine with you, um, was a learning experience. A good
I
one
have
though.
to tell you a story. So that, you remember, that was right in the beginning of COVID.
Hmm.
And so we couldn't shoot photos. We had to use older photos. And I had done a shoot for a different magazine a couple years before, and so we used photos that photographer had shot. Well, one of the photos was taken in the Casada factory, and there was a roller in the background of one of those photos. I was in the factory like a year ago, and it was right my first trip after I could start traveling again. So February of 21, I guess, or March 21. And one of the guys in the factory said, "Hey, you see this guy? He wants to meet you. He saw this magazine that you were in, but he was in the picture, and he wants a copy of the magazine." And I kept forgetting to bring it. On this last trip, just last week, I brought 4 copies of the magazine, and I brought it down, and I walked into the Galera, and I pointed at the guy, and I was like, "You." And I opened up the magazine, and I handed it to him. Bro, it was like he was on the cover of Rolling Stone. The entire Galera stood up and started clapping and going crazy. It was amazing, man.
That we did very good timing, I would say, with that whole article. That was like perfect timing. Not that we wouldn't have done it, with Ferio Tego, but it was just good timing, I think, because it focused on more so like your time in the industry than it did just product. Because product stories for me kind of, products come and go, especially now in the industry with everything being so limited in nature. But to focus on like I said, that story, that journey, and the music, that your musical background and all this other stuff. It was a really good story. But like I said, you taught me a lot about how to really craft a story. So I had to thank you for that, because even today I was working on stuff, and I was like, what Michael Herklots say? Michael Herklots would say, don't just type out the thing. If you can find a good quote that they actually said, like have them say the quote, and don't sit here and describe it. So you were very good.
Well, when you're ready to craft another one, you let me know, bro.
I would definitely let you know. So getting back to Ferio Tego, so you decide you're going to venture off and do Ferio Tego. Where did how did you start this process of like the products beyond like the Nat Sherman products that you knew that you wanted to bring back? Because you had 2 blends, and we had a comment earlier that's somebody posted, Generosa, Elegancia, Timeless Sterling are insanely tasty. Hoping to smoke up all of the others. That's Dan from Wooden Indian Tobacco Shop. Where did the idea?
Generoso and Elegancia. My thought for what Ferio Tego was going to be came before even the ability to acquire the Nat Sherman brands. So that work began really right when we announced the closing, spoke to lots of people. Everyone was encouraging me to do my own thing. And I figured, okay, I'm going to do this Ferio Tego concept. 2 blends, 1 size, humidified packaging. That's going to be the plan. So I engaged with the factories, specifically Plasencia and Quesada, right at the end of the summer, early fall. I guess it was early fall. Because by that point, I had worked with both factories intimately for 9 years. We had created successful blends together. And I had blends in the hopper that I was playing with just for future projects, whatever the need would be. Now the need was mine. And so both factories were immediately, and I can't express my gratitude enough, Quesada and Plasencia both said, "Brother, whatever you need, you got." And so we immediately engaged in some of the old. I had some samples at home from previous runs. I smoked through the samples. I made my notes, and we started making new samples. And so Ferio Tego, Elegancia, and Generoso were actually put in play before the end of the year, 2020, to get ready for 2021, because I figured by the time I figure out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, at least by then I'll have some inventory, but we have to start that process first. So we did the work so that when the factories opened in January, production could start right away and get the cigars in aging. But by that time, we had then also closed the deal for the acquisition of the other brands, and that was a much bigger lift. So when we started in January, we put in the orders for Elegancia and Generoso, and then immediately went to work on trying to redevelop the 9 blends that we were going to lead with, which are the 5 Metropolitan and the 4 Timeless, which in hindsight, I realized was absolutely a ridiculous undertaking to think that that we would go live with 9 blends across 2 brands, not to mention the 2 Ferio Limiteds. I mean, that was really that was a very big ask from the factories, but remarkably, we did it, and everybody, this really hits me as just mind blowing every time I think about it. When you think about the challenges that every cigar company faced in 2021 with stockouts, with supply chain issues, with staffing issues, with shortages, I don't know a company that didn't have back orders. How is it possible that we had 9 blends across 42 SKUs in a warehouse by November? The only way that's possible is every single factory and vendor put us in the front of the line. And that's, they didn't have to do that. And they did. All of them did. And so we were able to get those blends perfected and in production. And the box factories ramped up production. And the printing factories, cigar rings, there was no shortage of work for them. They were printing in Dominican and Nicaragua. They added extra shifts, and yet we still had our stuff on time, if not early. And that's because they believed in this project as much as I did. And they gave it everything they had, just like we did. And then we made it to market. Now, ultimately, we held Metropolitan until January just to give people breathing room, because I think we recognized how ridiculous the pace was. But we had it in the warehouse in November. We had it. That's an unbelievable pace, Herculean feat. And that's because everybody gave it everything. And so, that's, how did we do it? I have no idea how we did it. We did it because I asked politely to people who I love and admire, and they said yes to someone who I hope they love and admire, and away we went.
And just, these 2 sticks. So these were limited in nature just because I would think the pandemic and, like you said, the timing and the pacing and everything else going on. But what are your long-term plans for these 2 brands?
So Ferio Tego, Elegancia, and Generoso, the easiest way to think about the model behind those 2 is wine. So in any good wine house, let's say a house in Sonoma, they've got a Cabernet and a Chardonnay, and they make them every year with the hope of trying to recreate that classic style that particular brand is known for, but also recognizing that there may be some variations year to year, because in wine, everything in the bottle is the expression of the harvest. Now, in cigars, we don't have that same model. In cigars, we blend with all different harvests and vintages and leaf positions and seeds. And those change all the time in order to maintain the exact same experience. The plan for Ferio Tego, Elegancia, and Generoso is to give a little more room. The plan is to do annual limited releases of Elegancia and Generoso with enough inventory to hopefully satisfy the demand of that particular year, but with the full anticipation to exhaust that inventory and make room for it to return in the following year. So 2022, for example, is aging, and those will be released hopefully spring, and then those will be sold through, and we'll welcome them back in 2023 with Elegancia and Generoso again. And the idea of the format and packaging is also like following wine. We've eliminated a lot of the decisions. You don't need to think about what format to buy. Just like when you buy a bottle of wine, generally it's 750 milliliters. You don't need to think about how many bottles to buy, because usually a case of wine is 12 bottles, and this is a humidor of 10. And last, for a lot of my friends who are not huge cigar enthusiasts but really love cigars, I'm always met with the question, what do I do with them? Well, you don't put them in your sock drawer. You need to protect them. So I wanted to put them in packaging that would protect them, that you could literally take the packaging and put that in your sock drawer, and those cigars would be preserved for infinity as long as you just replace the humidification pack. So we tried to solve for all those easy things, and just make it simple and accessible for anyone to be able to love it, to appreciate it, to collect it, to pay attention to potential vertical tastings down the road over time. So that's the plan for Ferio Tego, the flagship. As it pertains to Ferio Tego Timeless and Metropolitan, Metropolitan dates back to 1994, and Timeless now is celebrating 10 years this year. That's a whole lot of folks who love and expect those cigars to be the same. And that's work that I'm proud of that we did for the 10 years that I worked at Nat Sherman, 9 years. And so that's still my obligation to do. It's an awesome responsibility to be able to carry on the legacy of Metropolitan that goes back to the 90s and make sure that the one that you smoke this time tastes the same and is as good as the one that you smoked the last time, and the same and as good as the one you smoked the first time, even if that's 30 years ago.
Now, with Ferio Tego, I know every entrepreneur who launches a business thinks at some point that they look at the market that they're entering into, and they have to figure out how to position their company or brands to be different from everybody else out there, to stand out in the eyes of the consumer. So as you were kind of looking at Ferio Tego, and without giving away too many of your marketing secrets, like how do you plan to position Ferio Tego to be different from all the other cigar brands? Like, what's going to make it different?
Well, I don't have any marketing secrets. I don't even have a marketing department. It's just me and Brendan. So there's no secrets. From a brand story, we are different in every way. There is no story like ours. So if I'm being as authentic and truthful and honest as I can be, that every single point I could raise is a point of differentiation from every other company on the market today, because there's only one Ferio Tego story. But there are some realistically obvious aspects that stand out. Number one, we're manufactured in all three major manufacturing countries that are sold in the United States of America: Honduras, Nicaragua, and Dominican Republic. We have brand new, exciting blends with Ferio Tego, Elegancia, and Generoso, and some projects to come in limited editions. But we also have a portfolio of legacy products. And as much as we love what's new, our industry was built on core. And if you were to poll the cigar enthusiasts throughout the United States, I think you would find that while we all love new things, I do too, we love things that we can depend on because we can depend on them. And there are a lot of brands that have been in market for decades, blends that have been in market for decades. But I don't think there is a portfolio that is as thoughtfully curated and maintained as ours is. That you could pick up a Metropolitan Connecticut made in Dominican by the Quesada family since 1995, and you can light it up today and recognize it as a portal directly back into a moment in time in 1995 when that blend was developed. That, for me, is a huge point of pride. And I'm very proud of the Ferio Tego blends. I really believe it's my best work. But I'm almost more proud of the consistency of Metropolitan. Those 1994 for Host, 1995 for Connecticut and Maduro. Timeless Prestige 2010. Creating new blends is not an easy thing to do, but to maintain them year after year after year after year, when every single ingredient and component is changing, how do you keep them the same? That is an unwavering commitment to the craft. And I'm committed, and the manufacturing partners are committed, and they've demonstrated that through my 9 years when it was my responsibility at Nat Sherman. And so we intend to carry that on. And so I would invite anyone to not just enjoy our cigars that are new, but taste our blends that are legacy, and understand the role that those blends play in the arc of the premium cigar industry story. There's a lot to the industry story, and I think if you look at the industry in these sort of snapshots, even if you just look at the last decade, if every milestone of our industry was a line on a chart, there would be a lot more lines as you get into the last 5 years, because just more happens, more releases, more companies, more brands, more blends, more everything. But I believe that each one of those lines, at least for the lines that we contribute, must be meaningful. They have to fill a void. There's got to be a why for the reason that we are selling them. And so I can absolutely defend the 9 reasons why our 9 blends, our 9 legacy blends, are restored to market. And I can definitely tell you why Elegancia and Generoso are in market.
And I think that's so important what you said, that you know the why, because a lot of businesses don't always communicate the why. And I think consumers, especially cigar consumers, they're a lot more savvy than, any other consumer group. They want to know why, they want the story. They want to feel like they're buying something that's,
But consumers are diverse as humanity itself. And there is something for everyone. So if you like the new, rock and roll, go for it. There are people who are doing that, and they're doing it tremendously well, better than I ever could, because it's not who I am. But I believe that if we're going to build a brand, we have to build a brand that is absolutely authentic and transparent to me and to Brendan and to our philosophy and to our model. And so our model is not the bright, shiny object and 4 new releases a month. We just can't do it. And I don't believe in it. What I believe in is thoughtful and deliberate releases that will be able to stand out among the population of releases at the time, whether they are new or whether they are legacy. That our portfolio will always be relevant, regardless of when you look at it. And so that's why Timeless resonates. It's why we created Timeless in the first place, is because Nat Sherman was such a timeless, thoughtful portfolio of products, even back then, that we created Timeless to celebrate that commitment to consistency.
Now, what have you learned about yourself in this Ferio Tego chapter of your life? What have you learned? What have you learned about yourself? I'm sure that there's been discoveries, like I said, since getting out of that corporate conglomerate type business environment, and now you're kind of on your own with the help of Davidoff, of course, to distribute it. But I'm sure it's a completely different setup than what you've been used to all these other years of working in the cigar industry.
I have learned first that smart people ask for help and dumb people think they can do it by themselves. I shouldn't say dumb people, because actually I'm sure there are very capable people who can do it by themselves. The dumb people are the ones who can't can't recognize it,
Right.
and that's dangerous. So I've certainly learned to ask for help when I need it, and to ask for guidance from people who are smarter than I. Um, I have learned to not take relationships for granted. Um, Going back to how do we do 9 blends and 42 SKUs in 11 months? I've talked about that a lot casually with friends, like just how remarkable a feat that is, and um, people tend to say that, well, you're a nice guy, and I that's very nice of them to say. But when I think back to my childhood and how I was brought up, I was always taught to be respectful, to treat people the way I would like to be treated, never burn a bridge, always preserve your relationships, always be networking. These constant adages from my father and my grandfather that in the back of my head, I'm like, come on, old man, like, what are you talking about? But I can't think of a more illustrative example of the value of those core tenets than the success of Ferio Tego in a very short amount of time. Um, with very few exceptions, when I've asked for help, I've gotten it. And when I've asked for a sale, I've been given a shot. And that's all I can ask for. But it's gratifying, but it's humbling. That people are willing to put their money up and invest in me in a far more personal way than what it was when I did that for Nat Sherman or when I did it for Davidoff before. This is profoundly personal because every dollar somebody invests in Ferio Tego, it's not going to a company that ultimately, I get a paycheck from. It's going to a company that I own, that my family will depend on, and that so many families depend on. Brendan's family, the Casada family, the Placencia family, Davidoff and their employees, all the employees that work in these factories. It's an awesome responsibility and feeling. And I suppose it's a lot like before my first daughter was born, people said, wait till you have a child, you will experience love like you've never experienced it. And probably the same way I thought about my father and my grandfather saying, don't burn a bridge. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it's special, whatever. Until the moment my daughter was born. And then I felt the most overwhelming sense of love that I've ever felt in a way that I couldn't express it. But it also made me realize in that moment the love that my parents have for me in a way that I could never experience until I felt that for my own child. And to a certain extent, that's how I feel now. What I've learned is the responsibility of not just being a business owner, but specifically being a small business owner in this incredible industry. And I have sat for years with small business owners in the premium cigar industry, trying to be an advocate as a good employee of a company,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to say the things that are important about family businesses and why our industry is different. But let me tell you, it feels very different when you own it, and it feels very different. It was great when people bought Timeless before because that was my first blend, but it feels very different now when I see somebody post Timeless and it says exclusively for Ferio Tego. It's just a different feeling, and it's hard to explain what that is to answer the question. What I've learned, other than the old age adage of we are the greatest industry and this is family and premium cigars are different, that is true. And it's always rung true to me, but it has never rung truer than it does today as an owner of Ferio Tego.
Now, to flip the script a little bit, as one of the final questions for today, you talked about how when you were looking for advice or guidance on what to do next, how you went to other people. So pretend in a scenario that somebody comes to you, they say, Michael, I want to go out on my own and start my own business. What advice would you give them?
Don't. No, I'm kidding.
Besides the don't.
I'm kidding.
To say don't. So besides don't, which is the easiest response.
I think the first question I would ask is, are you ready? Are you really ready? And if the answer is yes, then I would say absolutely do it, but be ready to put in the work. There, not even going on your own. When people ask, how do I do what you do?
Mm-hmm.
Was a question I was asked all the time when I worked for Nat Sherman. And my answer was always, well, first you get a degree in music, and then you become a retail salesperson for 6 years, and then you become a GM for 2, and then you become a GM for 3, because I don't know any other way than just the way I did it. But
Right.
what I know for certain is it was not overnight, and it's still not. It's 22 or 23 years, whatever it is. You've got to be willing to put in the work. That's number one. Number two is you have to listen more than you speak. We have a tendency, and I said it earlier, there's this tendency to want to be an authority and an expert. And that comes with time. But the more time you spend learning from smart people, the more you realize how much more you have to learn, and that you are better off being quiet and listening than you are just speaking, which obviously the last 55 minutes have not been a good example of me listening, and a very poor example of that, in fact. But I guess that would be my response. Are you ready? And if you believe you are, then you have to be willing to put in the work, and you have to be willing to listen. Assume that the model you have today to be successful may not be the model that becomes your success story. But if you are willing to put in the work, and you are willing to listen and surround yourself with smart people, then I say go for it.
Somebody had asked earlier, are you planning to do more touring of other areas, I guess, to visit different cigar stores now that we're learning, I guess, to live with COVID and adjust to life with COVID and all the restrictions? What's next for you in Ferio Tego?
I would love to start traveling more. I actually am traveling quite a bit. I have been. But one of the things I learned from COVID, so pre-COVID, I was probably gone realistically 15 to 20 nights a month. And that was not a lot compared to some of my peers and friends in the business. And I really tried to manage that work-life balance to be home. I realized I did a poor job managing that work-life balance, because 20 days a month away from my family is a long time. Now I'm getting back to traveling, and I realize how important it is. And I realize the value of time spent with people, not just the time spent like this.
Mm-hmm.
But as much as I love this, Antoine, the 3 minutes we spent in the booth together at TPE was profoundly more meaningful to me. Being able to give you a hug and catch up in person.
I was like, oh, like it's
it feels great. That's what our industry is. We are an industry that feels and tastes and embraces and loves. And so I am going to get back out more. What we're trying to do right now is to just make absolutely certain. Another thing I've learned, the most valuable thing in our lives is time, and specifically the time spent with people we love and doing things we love. And I love my family, and I love my kids, and I love my wife, and I love spending time together. And I love enjoying cigars, and I love enjoying cigars with people who enjoy cigars and who sell my cigars. And so I've got to create whatever that new balance is going to be. But I'm going to be just as deliberate and thoughtful as I am about launching a product. I'm also going to be very deliberate and thoughtful about launching myself into markets. I have to make sure that I'm spending thoughtful time with the people who are making our cigars to make sure that they feel appreciated. You know, I have not been to Nicaragua since Ferio Tego began.
Wow.
That's shame on me, but it's been difficult to get there because of all the restrictions.
Hmm.
And it's an incredible tribute to Plasencia, who has delivered our products as if I were there. But I need to spend time with them, and I need to tell them in person with a warm embrace how much I appreciate what they've done for me and for our families. Um, but then certainly, I was in Florida recently. I'm going to be in Tampa. I think the end of April. We're looking at Charlotte. I know now that we have the benefit of Davidoff's distribution, I'm in close contact with all our reps to make sure that we're spending time in key markets seasonally where it's appropriate. So to make sure we're in West Coast, we get to Texas, we get to the Midwest, and then sprinkle back in Southeast and Northeast, Mid-Atlantic when it's the most seasonably appropriate. So I am working on it, but it's difficult to fit it all in and stay committed to a family who I love. But I am working on it.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up for today, I know there's some people who are listening to this and are not watching it. So for those people who cannot see the banner that's on the bottom of the screen, would you mind telling them what websites they need to follow, what social media stuff they need to follow in order to keep up with you and Ferio Tego?
I would love to. For everything, me is Michael Herklots. So Michael Herklots on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, although I don't use that much, but it's still there. And for all things Ferio Tego company and brand is at Ferio Tego, except for Twitter, which is at Ferio Tego Cigars. But if you just Google search Ferio Tego, thank God the Google verse is doing what it's supposed to do. And we are a very easy company to find, and I'm a pretty easy person to find. And I would be super grateful if you would follow us on our journey. And for those of you who have been, I'm certainly grateful for all of your support, and I hope I can count on it in the future.
Well, I want to thank you for coming back on and subjecting yourself to all my questions for a second round. I've learned so much from you over the years. So anytime I get to catch up with you is always enjoyable. And I did have fun. You were one of those people I wanted to definitely see when I was at TPE. So hopefully I'll get out to PCA this year, and will love to catch up with you again there in person. So
well, let's make sure that happens if you're out there. And if you're not out there, let's make sure we do this again before 2 years goes by.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. So I want to thank you for coming on, Michael. I want to thank everybody else for watching it. We seem to have lots of comments today of people who want to wish you success, Michael. And they had fun learning more about Ferio Tego. So that's always great. And that's the kind of goal of Deep Cuts, is to give you an hour of kind of deeper questions and just wrapper binder fillers in terms of cigars. So
let me tell you, man, let me just throw in, you do an incredible job at this. It is not easy to put together shows. It's not easy to advocate for our industry. There are a lot of people out there throwing out content, but you curate content in a really meaningful way that makes our industry better. So I'm very grateful that you had me on, and even for all the other people that you have on that's not me. I love watching it, and I love what you do. So just keep on doing it.
Well, thank you so much. It's fun. I don't think I would do it if it felt like work. So this is extracurricular for me. So I love to learn. I love to talk to people like you. So it's all just been a great learning experience, having an hour with people, powerhouses like you, to just glean information from. So I've enjoyed it. Like I said, thank you for coming on. Thank you, everybody who's watching this or who listened to it in playback mode. For those of you who have not seen Deep Cuts before, go to deepcutslive.com. There's plenty of more articles and videos like this of interviews. And if you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, make sure you hit that like button or the follow button to follow us to get notifications for all the new interviews we have coming up. We have another interview coming up on Thursday with Bradley Rubin from Alec Bradley Cigars. And then we have like 2 interviews a week for the next couple weeks. So it's going to be pretty busy, but great, a good kind of busy. So
The best kind of busy.
it is. So thank you all for watching. And like I said, check out deepcutslive.com for all of our new content. And have a good night, Michael. And
You too.
bye for
Go
watching.
Ferio Tego.
Definitely.